Uh, Hello everyone, welcome to my presentation about validation at compile time for a .NET language and the frameworks. Um, and a few words about me, so some of you already saw it. So I wish to be like this dwarf in Wrocław, but I'm still like this. So I'm an aspect-oriented programming technology advocate. I'm really fond of this technology. Also, have a .NET background and currently working at Volvo as an IT architect. Have a, I believe, quite big experience in the .NET, and I'd like to show you um, how you can use aspect-oriented frameworks for architecture validation. And in general, my talk will be about safety. And safety from every perspective. So safety is you as an architect that developers wouldn't screw up your bright ideas in the code. For safety, you as a developer, so you wouldn't screw up yourself. Safety from any perspective, because why we are using test-driven development, other practices, just because we'd like to be sure that we don't break our code. Because we have so much complexity that it's hard to keep in mind all of these nuances, right? And what's the current state of the helpers that we have right now? So the first helper is a .NET language or framework by itself that provide to us some nice features. For example, right now we have in the .NET Roslyn, and we could write a lot of additional checks for our code. The next helper is a Visual Studio, and all nice things that we could get in a Visual Studio, like IntelliSense, semantic checking, a lot of different things. Previously it was FX code, but now it's incorporated in Visual Studio, so you could um, set up different checks of how your code is written, what kind of features do you have, so what kind of rules you are violate by your implementation. The next one is a code contract, but it's slightly different things, so you could check parameters, input, output variables, values, but it still will run at or executed at the runtime. So you don't know upfront is everything is okay. The last thing here is the StyleCop, but it's more about style guidelines, and to be honest, I don't like this thing because it have quite strange rules. And I remember the situation when we implemented it on one of our projects. Someone switched on all possible rules, and for example, you couldn't write a property and a constructor without predefined comment. So what's the reason for a predefined comment? I don't know. So there was were all the same. Okay, and when we're dealing with the code and the set, so you can see this bunch of a pseudocode and how much time will requires to you to identify where the business logic lies here. So I could even count maybe until 10 or 15 until you realize this real business code, right? So only 2 lines. The rest is some kind of infrastructure. So different checks, like a login, some validating params, or maybe some security checks here you can see. And only 2 lines of a code reference to a business logic, something that you are really care about from a business perspective. This is the core domain logic, yeah, and intention of a whole application. So with the aspects, it can be written in a much less lines, number of lines of code, right? So some of the validation can be implemented on an assembly level, and I'm going to show you how it can work and implement it. So, and if we take a look on a bigger picture, how it's work, in general, the previous, or one slide back, we are messing with the different cross-cutting concerns like a login, caching, security, whatever, right? And it's tightly coupled with the business logic, and we have to re-implement it once and once again, right? Agree? No? So it requires a huge amount of manual work. But we are paid not for typing a code, but for thinking. And aspect-oriented approach allows you to write a code in this onion structure. So you have crystallized business logic, and the rest can be separated and written only once. And more familiar picture just to show where it lies relating to other layers. So it's just a random picture from internet, so don't pay much attention on the other layers. So all application more or less the same from this perspective. And for those of you who are not aware about aspect-oriented programming, yeah, by the way, how many heard about aspect-oriented programming or used it? Wow, nice. Yeah, the question how intensive you're using it and do you treat it as a black magic or not, right? Um, and it also depends what kind of a framework do you use. So here you can see 4D, post-sharp, monoccessile, and some kind of interceptors that yeah, I believe have this label. Why? Because how does aspect-oriented programming frameworks works? So it's a magic, maybe a black magic. So this magic can be separated into two types. Waving, so some true magic with no limitation. So you can do almost wherever you want. You could instrument even the constructors. And interceptors, so there usually works as decorators, and you could instrument only public methods or interfaces. And the rest of my live coding and presentation will be related to PostSharp as a most mature framework for aspect-oriented programming, because it's production ready. You wouldn't get lost in the code with the aspects. You can see this by underlying methods or properties, wherever code construction you instrument with the aspects. And, sorry, you have a bunch of predefined aspects that you can use out of the box. So you can save your time. I wouldn't stop on all possibilities because it's really a long list, and my topic only about architecture validation. So if you're interested in, you can always write me or tweet, and we can talk about it, because I'm really keen in this technology and I want you to use it, because Java have aspect-oriented programming in enterprise for ages, more than for 10 years. But in the .NET, it's still like a unknown territory. Yeah, the only drawback that I can see for a PostSharp is the price for an ultimate or professional version, but there are discounts, so ask for it. And some boring technical details, what can be supported. I believe that all of you are working with Visual Studio with a number more than 2012, right? So it supports all modern C# versions. You could use it for a .NET Core or .NET Standard, support async, and a lot of different stuff. You can see at the bottom of the slide the link to check all technical requirements or details. So I believe that you will get this presentation after a conference. You could download it and check it. So that's why links at the bottom. So what features I'd like to talk about? So at the beginning, something that's built in. It's internal implement, internal protected naming convention. So they are intended to give you additional flexibility, because sometimes by a different reason you have to implement something as a public, just because parent class requires it or some other frameworks that you couldn't influence on. But at the same time, you don't want to allow developers to use constructors or some other public methods. And in general, these built-in aspects you could apply by IntelliSense or from Visual Studio just by clicking on currently it's a bulb, and to just select Add Architecture Constraint. So you will see this dialog box, and depending on the context where this class lays, you could see different options. So or you could see all of them, or maybe only part. For those of you who are sitting on the first rows, I could read prevent interface implementation in different assembly, prohibit use outside of the given types, prohibit use outside of the current class family, prohibit use outside of the current namespace, prohibit use outside of the current project, and yeah, I believe that's all. So it's quite easy to apply, and finally you will have this on a class level or on an assembly level. Depends on this aspect. And yeah, enough talking, so I'm going to show you some code, how it works. And I've tried to think about some real-life examples. And yeah, the first one will be about internal, protecting public constructor for dependency injection. Second one about protecting implementation of interface, and yeah, naming convention speaking for itself. So let me switch to Visual Studio. I believe I have to. And yes. I think it will automatically switch to. Okay. So I believe more or less you can read at least what is in editor, right? Okay. And the first example about this inversion of control. So usually when you work with any container, here in my example, this is structure map. You have to implement constructor as a public or internal. In the most cases public. I've experimented with internal, and looks like it couldn't get it. So just as regular situation when you define it, what type use or interface, passing something to a constructor, blah blah blah. So if I yeah, build it right now, everything succeeded. So as you can see, build succeeded. Yeah, and if I remove this internal and try to type it, it should, yeah, maybe build as well, but the test should fail, as far as I remember. Let's wait for a while. Yes, and you can see here's an failed test. So check in instantiation, and the message says that we couldn't find it. So at least one public constructor should be here. Yeah, you can see. So if we are going back to our implementation, I have to make it public. But I don't want to use it by developers as a public constructor to instantiate any class in any place in the code. So if I'd like to implement it in other project, it will say me that, sorry, buddy, you are not allowed to implement it. And here you could implement it as a warning or as an error. So you could put severity, yes, and as an error. I will show how it works later, so you'll see all of these errors. I believe it's quite useful, and I'm going to use it on my project. So actually, the real project that I'm working on uses PostSharp, but on a very low level. So it's only some basic login and caching functionality. The next one is about internal implementation, and this example is about interface and what we have here. Let's pretend that we have a public interface, like here, iPayment strategy, and I'd like to calculate something based on several parameters, so I omit them just for simplicity. And as soon as it may be very sensitive information in a way of calculation, I want to restrict implementation only by myself, so only in my projects. But at the same time, I would like to allow to others use this interface as an accepted parameters or, yeah, in general, to accept it, to work with it. And it might be kind of hard to restrict all of this usage. So either here should be a very strict discipline, or you will get into troubles. So what we have here, once again, so build successful, but at the same time, when I'm try to implement it in other interface or project, yes, estimation calculator. Right, I think yes. Now it's okay. And if I'm going to uncomment it and run, I will get an error. But sorry, cannot be implemented because of the internal implement constraints. So I believe it's quite useful. You could control where your interfaces will be implemented. Because you can write it on your own. To check this depends on different conditions. Okay, I'm going to comment it back just to not mess up with the errors. The next one is about naming convention, and it can be really helpful in many situations because if we work with so we have a lot of actually situations with the naming convention in MVC, MVVM, and if you don't like to mess up with the names, that everything should be in a particular folder, you could force this usage, or somehow, let's say, force also developers to use a naming convention. Because if I have here in adapter folder all classes named as an something and adapter, I could use auto-discovery feature of the inversion of control frameworks and do not register it manually. So I'm also protecting myself from silly mistakes when I add a new class and just forget to register it, and I will get a runtime error. So auto-discovery will help me, but for auto-discovery I need naming convention. I need that everyone should follow it. So with the naming convention, I can use it. So here you can see that there is no, oh, I forget this word once again, attributes, yeah, but if I add something here, like just duplicate it and provide some additional name, I could build it, build fail, and you can see the error that yes, it do not follow the some predefined pattern. So everything should add on adapter. And how it works? It defined on assembly level. Here, you can see naming convention, how it works. So you provide some pattern or template, and you could say at which namespace it can be applied, and the severity of error. So it can be warning or error or something else, just a message. Also, you can use regex. The only difference will be that here pattern will be started from regex and regex goes. Okay, I just return it, and also you have a protected built-in attribute. And I have an example, but at the last minute I realized that I forget how protected works in details, to be honest. So it's still in a code, and you could take a look on it, and it works like internal, all the same, but with a different level of visibility and usage. Okay, this is about built-in attributes. The next part might be more interesting. So, about debugging. Yeah, it's a most common question, so how debug all this stuff? It's not a problem when you have built-in because someone tested before you, and you could be quite sure that yes, everything works just fine, and it's tested by a community and other users. But what about your own validation? And it can be easily used through the command line, but it's not a true way of the developers because developers should be lazy, very lazy. So you can set up a tool, external tool. Here on the slide you can see how to do it. And I put these small notes for you when you'll get this presentation, so you can just copy paste it. So it will be all the same for every project. The only path will change if you're using a different version of Visual Studio. And I could use it from external tools, or you can go further, set up additional button on your toolbar and assign a hotkey. When I use it extensively, I'm doing it in this way, and you can debug it. In a normal way, just set a breakpoint and run application. And I'm going to show you, it's a little bit later how it works, that it's really, you get all of this information through the debugging, because with the reflection it's not easy sometimes to work, because you don't know upfront what you get. And what kind of available constraints do you have to implement on your own? So there is a type of level aspects that you could apply to assembly, to a type, to a property, a method. In the same way you will implement any other aspect, like a caching, login, wherever you want. And also you have some specific ones, color constraint and referential constraint. The only difference between these two, that color constraints is much faster and it checks code only in one project. Referential constraints check the whole solution that someone could reference to a class, or you check the usage. I'm going to show you an example. So it will be much more clear just in a few minutes. And how to write this constraint. So at first, you identify an annoying problem that can be possibly checked automatically. So it's a step 0. Then you select one of the constraints, depending on what you're going to check. In the case of a type level aspect or assembly, it will be all the same. You have to override this method, compile, time, validate, and you could do wherever checks you want, getting this type. So this just return base, predefined one, so you can safely delete it and write your own code. The second option is select one of the constraint types from those referential or scalar. It doesn't matter, they provide to you two types, validate code. How you're going to validate these types, and validate constraint by itself. So you could restrict in the constraint to which types it should be applied. It might be more complex and flexible than just applying to some particular namespace. And with your imagination and some magic of a post-sharpening reflection, you get a result, you enjoy the life, and share the knowledge and code samples with your colleagues, peers. Because if you write it once, and it's quite general, and it should be general because you're using a reflection and generic types, you could safely use it in whole your organization and reuse these code samples. So write once and forget. Yeah, it's a nice paradigm, but then you really start forgetting how you wrote this. So please comment it extensively. And again, time for demo. So This is my personal pains about the static, because my current project full of static classes, methods, and so on, and the whole project is tightly coupled. And I believe it will help me to identify all of these places, because it's really time-consuming to search visually. Oh, sorry. Yeah. And I could then at first set it as a warning and then set it as an error, so developers wouldn't able to implement static classes at all, with some exclusions, of course. Violation of inversion of control frameworks. One of the violation is using as a service locator. The next one, instantiation violation, that you instantiate your classes in proper places, also related to inversion of control. And some average violation just because we are heavily using nhibernate, and nhibernate requires virtual properties. So, and I don't want that others will override it somewhere, so it will just raise a huge level of confusion. So, back into code. I believe it will switch automatically. Yes, nicely. And, okay, I have to check my notes, yeah. So, conventional checks, I believe it should be somewhere here. Yes. No static usages, and some example. So, there is my ugly enterprise class. Currently, it's not static. And yeah, as you remember, it can be successfully built. And no, adapter. Sorry, where is some adapters? Have to delete this. So now it's built successfully. Back into no static example. From my perspective, the only legal usage is static fields, and in this case, you get a successful build. Build succeeded. And if I'm going to write, let's say, start, I will start from a property. And it will say me that, come on, sorry. Looks like you're increasing house in a project using static modificator. So it's something that I'd like to avoid. And the next nice thing that you could see here, it says me where it was used and the line of the code. So when I click on it, it will navigate me to this part. I was quite lazy here and navigate to the type, but you could be more hardworking and navigate to this exact property. And you could also see that there's no attributes because it was applied on an assembly level. Because if I will apply it here, so what's the sense then for the aspects, right? So how it was implemented? Here's no static. I wouldn't dive into details of this attribute here. How it's implemented. As I told, it's might be type level aspects, one of the possibilities. And I'm overriding compile time validate, so it's accept any type from assembly. Quite simple logic, so you get at first and at the last all of these static public properties, because I'm not interested in the private one, private because no one can use it and it's safe to use. And one exclusion. I think that you will agree with me as well that this is the legal example for extension methods, right? It have to be static and with the static methods. So I'd like to avoid it, and as you can see, it works nicely. So just additional check that for extension methods that it have extension attribute, that's all. So you can see I specifically removed all this number of lines, but it's line number 43 and this one is 13. So it's about 30 lines of code that helps you to check all of this stuff. And you could write any message with the names, properties. Yeah, I was just lazy and pass this location of a type. But you could store here the static method info, field info, wherever you want. So navigate to this exact place. The next example is about, I hope you find it useful. The next is about this service locator, and it might be quite complicated. Yeah, by the way, yes, while we have a time, I could show you how it's work for debugging. So I set a breakpoint in a type level aspect, and from the tools, aspect debug, so you can see, you could name it as you wish. I'm going to run it, and yeah, it will ask you for a debugger. It's not so one-click debug, but still, let's check maybe. In this case, if you haven't seen that it's stopped somewhere, it means that compilation didn't succeed, and you have to eliminate all other errors. So I'm going to remove this static property and static method. It's because without implementation it skips, and I could run it once again. And why? Okay, looks like I would try on another one aspect, but it should work. Have no idea why right now. So it's maybe it's a curse of a live presentation, you know? Okay, at least it's okay. It worked. I tried to use for another type of an aspect, and this is about inversion of control. How you restrict these things. Oh, yeah. Where I have it in the service locator. Yes, here. So service locator, here's there are two attributes, and it first checks that container wasn't used somewhere inside the code in this way, like a service locator get, or so. I think you could. I believe you have quite good imagination to think about service locator of your choice or inversion of control of your choice. And when you try to get this implementation by interface, by name, so depends on the capability of your inversion of control framework. And also that you didn't use this container explicitly, because it's also a bad practice. Okay, I could run it, and you will see these errors that. Okay, so no service locator anti-pattern in my code, and passing service locator as a parameter is prohibited, because inside you can do wherever you want, and it's uncontrolled, especially when I take a look on a constructor in tests. So I'm not aware what should be inside. So it's like a black box for me, and if I just instantiate it, it might use some other services, classes, whatever, and when I run the test, it will fail, and I wouldn't have any idea what it failed. I have to dig inside the method to check what exactly requires for this class. Okay. So the same with the get and set, and you could also use something like additional attributes for checking that. Yes, it's allowed. And about implementation, so this is in validate code. you just keep in any method that have this custom attribute. Oh, yes, it's on the top. So quite easy, right? Anyway, you will get all methods, so you just check for an attribute, and it's only one line of checks. So it's, from my perspective, very easy to read, and you can see how simple is it. Even on this scale, you can see the full implementation. Okay, and the next one, instantiation. Really nice. Here's source B, and it's also connected to this inversion of control. I have an interface, so usually where I used to, and it's really like in a habit to extract an interface for any business service. So usually we have an interface with a set of methods, and we have a few implementations. So this is implementation and some consumer service. And it's nothing stops you from instantiation it directly without usage of inversion of control framework, right? Or dependency injection. So, but with validation, you could get this error that no, do something else. Navigating back, so I could see what is wrong, and if I remove it, you can see that everything is built is succeeded, and we get some violation of good practices, and this code starts smelling, right? So pretty nice feature, and you can see that it's applied to interface, and I could write down as many implementation as I want, and for all of them this constraint will be applied. So you can precisely control it. You also can have a folder with these interfaces and apply this constraint to this folder from the assembly level. So you wouldn't instruct every particular interface. And implementation, here might be something interesting. It's also very simple. And PostChar provide some helper classes, like here reflection search, and you could search derived types, get methods using declaration, or get declaration using by methods, so you can check what was used inside or who used your method or a class. So it's quite flexible, and you avoid a lot of repetitive coding with these helper classes. And you can see so many lines of code just because I have to increase the scale to 200% to make it visible during presentation. So normally it will be twice less for you. And the last one here, let's try with this referential constraint, because right now it should work. No, eliminate these usages and try once again. Yes, bingo. And you could check what to get as a target type, so you can see this new fancy IntelliSense helpers, so you can easily debug, see what you have, what kind of illegal usages. So just normal debugging. I hope it's not everyday experience for you, and you're using a test-driven development. So, and use this debug as a last source for finding the truth. I believe in you. Okay, and the last one, I thought that it can be really time-consuming implementation. How could I check that in this case, when I have a, let's say, customer class, or in general DTOs that's inherited from Hibernate, I don't remember the exact inheritance or a base class because I don't like any Hibernate. I don't like any ORM, to be honest, except micro ORMs. But still, we have a virtual properties, and I want to be sure that no one override it. And if someone tries to do it, I could get this error once again that someone tries to do it. And once again, I get the navigation. You can see here to the exact property. So here I wasn't lazy. And and here I could show you the difference between referential constraint and scalar. So one moment, let's check the implementation. I left comments for you as well. So I have also the rights in a different project. So here's one of the projects, so you can see. So it's somewhere here, another one, services. And if I open it, you can see that someone inherited from a customer, from this one, so I'm not lying, you see. And if I'm going to override it, even in other libraries, so, unexpected. I get error as well, and it will navigate me. But if I will change it to a scalar constraint and slightly change the signature, I will get only one error. Please should. Yes. Wait a second. I've just checked it before the presentation, and it should work. Yes, build succeeded. So you can see, but at the same time, I get this overrides. This is the only reference. It's referential check the whole project, scalar only one. And this is everything what I get about the examples. And you could have a reasonable question. So if you check the whole project, so how it will affect my compilation time? Maybe I have to wait for years or ages, right? And what you can do, you could set up a different configuration, build configuration. For example, create a gated in, or with aspect, or with compilation, so up to you. And I didn't knew that in this auditory it will be hard to see on the bottom, but you can use compilation attributes. I will show you in the code for this project. One moment. You see this conditional compilation symbols, and you could easily switch it off or on a developer's machine and force this key on a build agents. So developers wouldn't have any possibility to avoid these checks, because here on a very local machine they could easily remove it, but on a compilation server it should present. And of course, if someone just remove these lines, it wouldn't be a nice behavior. Still, it's some kind of discipline, but it could save you time. When you work locally and don't want to spend this time on additional checks, you can make it a little bit faster. But it's really a little bit, because I've tried it on a real project, on a 2. So you can see some small one with only 25 files. I was checking for a static and virtual, and as is, it took 8 seconds. With the post sharp and switched on validation on 1/10 of a second more. So it's like this threshold of accounting. And for the big project with 900 files, it took 1 minute and 40 seconds. And before I get 639 warnings, with a post sharp, when I apply this static and overriding of the virtual, it takes only 2 seconds more. And the difference between the warnings is something that I get from the post sharp. I couldn't say, to be honest, that it's significant drawback from a performance perspective. Because 900 files, the code base about 9 megabytes, so it's a huge amount of information. So, because this is one of the constraints of, or let's say one of the complaints about aspect-oriented programming, that when you apply these aspects, compilation time became much slower. And yes, it's partially true. Everything depends on how intensively you are instructing your code. And if you're going to apply this, let's say, logging for every method, yes, it will take much longer, maybe 3 times more. But maybe it's worth for it if you are searching for some Heisenberg bug that's really hard to catch. And some drawbacks and limitations. So you cannot analyze code as is. For example, at first I thought that maybe there might be a possibility to check if someone using a switch statements in the code. Because yeah, I have some prejudice about it. It's like using Go too. And actually, this is how it's implemented. And because of the nature of the true aspect-oriented frameworks, like a 4D, post-sharp, monocecil, you cannot get it because switch will be transferred to if-else statement or a go-to statements. And if you'd like to check it, please use Roslyn. So it might be more efficient. And drawbacks, yeah, I mentioned it, compilation time depends on intensity. I remember a story when I'd like to find out some bug and I haven't any idea where to find it. I wrote an aspect to log every method entry parameter. I spent for it maybe 15 minutes. When I run a build, it took maybe 10 times more, to be honest. I run an application. It works very slowly. I get tons of logs, but finally I spent only 1 day reading these logs and finding where these exact errors present. Otherwise, I would write manually in a many of the methods, classes, what was count, how it was calculated. Then I'm going to have to remove these lines of code. But with the aspects, I implement it, apply on the assembly level. When I find out the bug, I just remove this line from the assembly, and it works. So nothing affects your code. And the key takeaways from this session. So the main takeaway that yes, safety is a prerequisite. So safety encourages us for experimenting, for writing better code. And yeah, some other bullets that you could read on your own. I believe you are good at reading. And yeah, I think it's already time. So thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions, please feel free to write me or tweet to me. So here's a few links about technical details, the book about aspect-oriented programming, how you can implement it for different patterns. Again, Go4 pattern, for example, you could save a lot of infrastructure codes. Some post-sharp samples at GitHub. You could also test these attributes, but it's much more complicated. And you could find out these code samples at my GitHub. So this is the last link. So if you have any questions, feel free to chase me at Volvo booth, and I will be glad to answer on all your questions. And I have more examples about Again, go for patterns, how you can implement it with post-sharp, with aspects, which patterns benefited from aspect-oriented programming, which is not. And I could show you how you can get this additional information from the IDE about applied patterns. So thank you for your attendance. I hope that it was useful for you, and I'm really encourage you to use this post-sharp. So chase your managers to buy this product. Thank you.